In the context of the American Civil War, where courage intertwines with tragedy, James Longstreet's journey stands out as a complex and conflicted tale. Born on January 8, 1821, in Edgefield District, South Carolina, Longstreet grew up in a Southern family rich in tradition, with Dutch roots that had settled in America for generations. Although born in South Carolina, he spent much of his childhood in Georgia and Alabama, where he learned values such as hard work, honor, and loyalty, qualities that would shape his life. As the fifth of 9 children, Longstreet's early years were marked by the simple lifestyle of Southern farming families. His father, James Longstreet Sr., was a successful farmer and played an important role in educating his children. Young Longstreet absorbed the importance of perseverance, physical training, and resilience, qualities he would need in the future. Education was a significant value in the Longstreet family, though it was not formal as it would be later on. James attended local schools to gain a basic foundation of knowledge, but it was his mother, Mary Ann Dent Longstreet, who instilled in him a strong sense of responsibility and ethics. A devout woman, she had a profound influence on Longstreet throughout his life, particularly regarding honor and duty. In 1838, at just 17 years old, Longstreet received an appointment to the United States Military Academy at West Point, a prestigious opportunity that opened the door to a military career. This was no small feat, as West Point was regarded as one of America's top military schools, producing many of the future nation's key leaders. Located along the Hudson River in New York, West Point was a stark contrast to the rural South Longstreet was familiar with. The academy created a challenging environment aimed at transforming young men into capable officers, ready to lead armies into battle. The curriculum focused on mathematics, engineering, and military strategy. However, academics were not Longstreet's strength. He graduated 54th out of 62 students in the class of 1842. Despite his unremarkable academic record, he built strong relationships with classmates, including Ulysses S. Grant and William Rosecrans, connections that would significantly impact his life in both peace and conflict. After graduation, Longstreet was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the 4th U.S. Infantry, marking the start of a military career that would span more than 30 years. His first assignment took him westward to serve in the Indian Wars, where he gained valuable experience in leadership and combat. However, it was during the Mexican-American War that Longstreet made his mark as a courageous and capable officer. Serving under General Zachary Taylor and General Winfield Scott, he participated in several key battles, including the Siege of Veracruz and the Battle of Monterrey. At the Battle of Chapultepec in 1847, Longstreet's bravery came at a steep cost, while carrying the regiment's colors. He was severely wounded in the thigh by a bullet. Despite the pain, he refused to leave the battlefield and continued to lead his men until victory was achieved. This act of bravery earned him a brevet promotion to major and cemented his reputation as a formidable leader. The wounds Longstreet sustained in Mexico were not just physical, they shaped his resolve and perspective on leadership and duty. The Mexican-American War served as a proving ground for many officers who would later play pivotal roles in the Civil War, and for Longstreet, it was a key chapter in his early military career. As the 1850s progressed, Longstreet's military career continued to advance, but the growing societal tensions foreshadowed an impending conflict. The nation was teetering on the brink of a bloody confrontation, and Longstreet was about to find himself in the eye of the storm. But first, there was a period of peace, like the calm before the storm. As the United States inched toward civil war in 1861, James Longstreet faced a decision that would shape both his life and the history of the nation he had served for nearly 2 decades. His loyalty to his native South Carolina and the Southern cause led him to resign his commission in the U.S. Army on June 1, 1861, a decision that was anything but simple. Like many other Southern officers, he felt a deep sense of duty to his home. Longstreet's journey into the Confederate Army marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life, one in which he quickly rose to the highest levels of military leadership. He immediately joined the Southern war effort, being appointed brigadier general and commanding a brigade in the Confederate Army at General P.G.T. Beauregard's battlefield. His first major combat came at the First Battle of Bull Run, also known as the Battle of Manassas, where he began to establish his reputation as a talented and courageous leader. On July 21, 1861, Union and Confederate forces clashed near Manassas, Virginia. The battle was chaotic and brutal, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. Longstreet's brigade was positioned on the Confederate right flank, where they played a crucial role in holding the line against repeated Union assaults. Despite the confusion and intensity of the battle, Longstreet maintained his composure, displaying the steady leadership style that would become his hallmark. His exemplary performance at Bull Run earned him respect from his peers and superiors, including General Joseph E. Johnston, who recognized Longstreet's potential for higher command. This promising start was only the beginning of a distinguished career in the Confederate Army. As the war continued, Longstreet's responsibilities grew. In October 1861, he was promoted to Major General and given command of a division in the newly formed Army of Northern Virginia. The Peninsula Campaign in the spring of 1862 was his first major test as a divisional commander. Union General George B. McClellan launched a massive offensive aimed at capturing Richmond, the Confederate capital. Longstreet's division was at the forefront of the defense, participating in key battles like Williamsburg and Seven Pines. His performance during the campaign solidified his reputation as one of General Lee's most reliable and decisive commanders, who called Longstreet his "old warhorse." However, it was at the Second Battle of Manassas in August 1862 that Longstreet truly made his mark as a formidable force. In a decisive moment, he launched a massive flank attack on General John Pope's Union Army, driving them from the field. This assault showcased Longstreet's tactical brilliance and earned him widespread praise. The victory at Second Manassas marked a turning point in the Eastern theater of the war and secured Longstreet's place as one of the Confederacy's most important generals. His success was not only due to his tactical abilities but also to his ability to inspire and discipline his troops, who trusted him as a leader who could guide them through the most arduous battles. With momentum from the victory at Second Manassas, Lee and Longstreet turned their sights northward, launching the Maryland Campaign in the fall of 1862, culminating in the Battle of Antietam, the bloodiest single day in American history. At Antietam, Longstreet's men once again played a key role in holding the line against Union attacks. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, Longstreet's troops fought tenaciously, holding critical positions such as the Cornfield and Bloody Lane. Thanks to his defensive skill, the Confederate Army was able to withdraw in an organized manner, avoiding complete disaster. His ability to manage the chaos of the battlefield and make quick decisions under pressure was once again on full display. While Antietam ended in a tactical stalemate, strategically, it forced Lee to retreat to Virginia. Yet, Longstreet's performance once again solidified his reputation as one of the Confederacy's most capable generals, having demonstrated his prowess not only in offense but also in defense. By the end of 1862, Longstreet had become one of the pillars of Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. As the war entered its third year, Longstreet's role in the Confederate Army became increasingly important. He had gone from being a relatively unknown Southern officer to a key figure in the South's war effort. However, the greatest challenges and controversies were yet to come. The battles ahead would test not only his tactical abilities but also his relationships with those around him, particularly Robert E. Lee. The Civil War was far from over, and for James Longstreet, the hardest fights were still ahead. As we continue to follow his story, we will see how decisions made on the battlefield would not only impact the war's outcome but also shape Longstreet's legacy for generations to come. By the summer of 1863, James Longstreet had firmly established himself as one of Robert E. Lee's most trusted commanders. His reputation as a brilliant tactician and reliable leader was cemented. However, the battle that would shape his legacy, both in victory and tragedy, was looming. The Battle of Gettysburg would become a turning point in the American Civil War, and for Longstreet, it would be a battle that would haunt him for the rest of his life. After this victory, he would face unimaginable pain and hardship. In the Battle of Chancellorsville, General Robert E. Lee, along with the Army of Northern Virginia, launched an ambitious campaign to invade the North, aiming to draw the Union Army away from Virginia and force them into a decisive battle on Northern soil. James Longstreet, commanding the 1st Corps, was a critical figure in Lee's plans. Confident in his abilities, Lee relied on Longstreet's understanding to push for another victory. The Southern Army arrived at Gettysburg on July 1, 1863, encountering General George G. Meade's Army of the Potomac. The first day of the battle saw the Southern forces push the Union troops through the town to the high ground south of Gettysburg, where they set up defensive positions on Cemetery Hill and Cemetery Ridge. Although achieving initial success, the battle was far from over, and Longstreet would soon clash with Lee over the next course of action. On the evening of July 1, Longstreet met with Lee to discuss plans for the following day. Encouraged by the day's success, Lee was determined to continue the offensive. He believed that a full-scale assault on the Union center could break their defenses and deliver a decisive victory. However, Longstreet, a cautious strategist, disagreed. He advocated for a more defensive approach, proposing that the Confederate Army move around the Union left flank to establish a strong position between the Union forces and Washington, D.C. He believed this maneuver would force the Union to attack on ground of his choosing, where the Confederates could make effective use of artillery. Despite Longstreet's objections, Lee remained resolute and ordered a direct assault. The second day of the Battle of Gettysburg became one of the most controversial moments in Civil War history. Longstreet was tasked with leading attacks on the Union's left flank at locations such as the Peach Orchard, Wheatfield, and Round Tops. Aware of the risks involved, the attack began late in the afternoon, and his troops faced fierce resistance from the Union defenders. The fighting was brutal and chaotic, with heavy casualties on both sides. At the Peach Orchard and Wheatfield, the Confederates made some gains, but the Union defense held firm. Meanwhile, the assaults on the Round Tops, led by General John Bell Hood, ended in disaster, as the Union forces, particularly the 20th Maine Regiment under Strong Vincent's command, mounted a legendary defense. Longstreet watched as his attacks stalled and casualties mounted. He realized that the decision to attack the Union left had been a costly mistake. But by then, there was no turning back. Despite the difficulties, Lee was determined to continue attacking, setting the stage for the infamous events of July 3, 1863. That evening, Longstreet wrote a letter to his wife. Reflecting on the day's events, he expressed doubts about continuing the attack and concern for his men. But he remained willing to follow orders, even if it meant sacrificing his own instincts. The third day of Gettysburg would bring one of the most tragic and famous moments of the Civil War, Pickett's charge. Lee, believing that a concentrated assault on the Union center would break their lines, ordered Longstreet to oversee the attack. Longstreet harbored deep reservations about the plan and was reluctant to give the order. But he complied out of duty. Around 3 p.m., 12,500 Confederate soldiers began their advance across a mile-long stretch of open ground toward Cemetery Ridge. The attack, known as Pickett's Charge, endured a devastating artillery barrage from the Union forces and rifle fire. Longstreet could only watch in despair as his men suffered heavy casualties. The charge ended in disaster. The Confederates were repelled with massive losses, and over half of those who participated were killed, wounded, or captured. This was a crushing defeat for the Confederates, and Longstreet realized they had not only lost the battle but possibly the war. After Gettysburg, Lee and Longstreet met to discuss the retreat to Virginia. Lee, deeply affected by the defeat, took full responsibility for the failure. But the burden of the loss weighed heavily on Longstreet as well. He had been unable to persuade Lee to adopt a different strategy, and the consequences were severe. The Battle of Gettysburg marked a turning point in the American Civil War, haunting Longstreet for the rest of his life. The retreat from Gettysburg was somber. The Army of Northern Virginia was now a shadow of its former self, and the soldiers' morale was shattered. For Longstreet, the battle represented not only a military failure but also a personal and professional crisis that lingered long after the war ended. Gettysburg would be remembered as one of the most significant battles in American history, and Longstreet's role in it would be scrutinized and hotly debated in the years that followed. His decisions at Gettysburg would be both criticized and defended, becoming central to his legacy. For Longstreet himself, the battle was a source of deep regret, a moment when his loyalty to Lee and the Southern cause came at a high cost. As we continue Longstreet's story, we will see the legacy of Gettysburg follow him through the final years of the war and beyond. The decisions made during those fateful 3 days would cast a long shadow over his life, shaping not only his role in the remaining battles but also his place in history. The defeat at Gettysburg was a bitter pill for both the Confederate Army and James Longstreet. It marked the beginning of a long and difficult path. The Army of Northern Virginia, once mighty, now struggled with dwindling resources, low morale, and increasingly harsh realities. For Longstreet, the war was far from over, but the events that followed would test his resilience and loyalty in ways never before seen. After retreating from Gettysburg, Longstreet returned to Virginia with the rest of the corps. The weight of defeat bore down on him, but he remained committed to the Southern cause. His relationship with Lee became strained, although Lee had taken responsibility for the defeat. The disagreements between them persisted. Longstreet's cautious style increasingly contrasted with Lee's aggressive strategy. In the fall of 1863, Longstreet was ordered to detach from Lee's army and head to Tennessee to reinforce General Braxton Bragg's forces. The Confederate leadership hoped that Longstreet's presence would bolster the struggling army in the Western theater. His arrival in Tennessee met with mixed reactions as tensions between Longstreet and Bragg quickly emerged. From the start, Longstreet and Bragg had a strained relationship. Bragg was notorious for his difficult personality and poor relations with his subordinates. And Longstreet was no exception. Longstreet was given command of a large portion of Bragg's army to attack Union forces under General Ambrose Burnside at Knoxville. The Knoxville Campaign, from November 4 to December 4, 1863, became one of the most difficult and frustrating experiences of Longstreet's career. The siege of Knoxville faced numerous obstacles, including challenging terrain, inadequate supplies, and fierce resistance from Union forces. Longstreet's troops struggled to make headway against Burnside's entrenched forces, with the most notable engagement being the failed assault on Fort Sanders, where the Confederates suffered heavy losses. The failure at Knoxville dealt a major blow to Longstreet's reputation, as poor support from Bragg and a lack of coordination between the two commanders worsened the situation. Longstreet's dissatisfaction with Bragg's leadership grew, and he became increasingly outspoken, leading to tensions between the two men. After Knoxville, Longstreet, along with several other Confederate officers, began openly questioning Bragg's competence, even discussing the possibility of removing him from command, which could have had serious consequences for the Southern war effort. However, this plan never came to fruition, and Longstreet returned to Virginia in the spring of 1864. Back in Virginia, Longstreet rejoined Lee's army just in time for the Overland Campaign, a series of brutal battles against General Ulysses S. Grant. The campaign marked Longstreet's return to the intense fighting of the Eastern Theater, where he played a key role in the defense of the Confederacy. On May 5, 1864, the Battle of the Wilderness erupted in the dense forests of northern Virginia. With fierce and chaotic fighting, under Longstreet's command, his corps made significant contributions in repelling several Union attacks, boosting the soldiers' confidence in his steady leadership. Disaster struck on May 6 when Longstreet was accidentally shot by his own troops in a friendly fire incident. The bullet tore through his shoulder and neck, leaving him with a severe injury. Longstreet's wound was eerily similar to that of Thomas "Stonewall" Jackson, who had died from friendly fire a year earlier, and it rendered him unable to fight for several months. His injury threatened his life, as the bullet damaged his windpipe and nearly severed an artery. However, thanks to the skill of Confederate doctors, Longstreet survived, but his recovery was slow and painful, forcing him to relinquish command during this period. In his absence, the Confederate Army faced some of its most difficult challenges. As Grant continued his relentless push toward Richmond, Longstreet returned to the Army in October 1864 to a grim situation. He was welcomed back by his comrades, but the Confederacy's position had become increasingly dire. The war dragged on, with the Union's overwhelming strength and resources gradually wearing down the South. Despite still recovering from his wounds, Longstreet resumed command with determination, intent on supporting Lee and the Southern cause. The final chapter of Longstreet's wartime career was the Siege of Petersburg. a prolonged conflict lasting from June 1864 to April 1865. The siege became a war of attrition, with both sides suffering heavy losses in the trenches. Longstreet, still affected by his injuries, played a crucial role in defending Petersburg, using his experience and tactical skill to hold off the Union forces for as long as possible. As time passed, it became clear that the Confederacy's position was untenable. The fall of Petersburg would open the way to Richmond, the Confederate capital, making the end of the war seem inevitable. Longstreet stood by Lee's side, doing his best to delay the Union advance, but the situation grew increasingly hopeless. In April 1865, the Confederate defenses at Petersburg finally collapsed, forcing the army to retreat. The Army of Northern Virginia, once mighty, was now a shadow of its former self, and the retreat was a somber affair. Longstreet, who had seen the best and worst of the Confederate war effort, remained loyal to Lee until the very end. On April 9, 1865, General Robert E. Lee surrendered to General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse, effectively ending the Civil War. For Longstreet, the surrender was both a personal and collective tragedy. He had fought bravely for the Southern cause but had long recognized the futility of continuing the fight. The war had taken a toll on him physically, emotionally, and professionally, and now, with the Confederacy in ruins, he had to face an uncertain future. After the war, Longstreet faced a difficult transition to civilian life. Like many former Confederate generals, he struggled to rebuild his life and reputation in a radically changed nation. However, Longstreet's post-war years would take an unexpected and controversial turn. Unlike many of his fellow Confederates, who continued to resist Reconstruction and the Union, Longstreet chose a different path, one that would alienate him from much of the Southern community. Longstreet's post-war legacy and reputation became a subject of intense debate and controversy. His decision to support the Republican Party and embrace Reconstruction policies caused outrage among many former Confederates, who saw him as a traitor to the Southern cause. His friendships with Union leaders like Ulysses S. Grant further inflamed tensions, and he was vilified by many of his former comrades. Critics, including members of the Lost Cause movement, sought to tarnish Longstreet's legacy, blaming him for the defeat at Gettysburg and other Confederate failures. Despite the harsh criticism, Longstreet remained steadfast in his beliefs. He believed that the South's future lay in reconciliation with the Union and the integration of freed African Americans into society. He held various government positions, including serving as U.S. Minister to Turkey and as a Commissioner of Railroads. His post-war career was marked by a willingness to embrace the new realities of the United States, a choice that set him apart from many of his contemporaries. Longstreet's life after the war was one of reflection and resilience. He spent his final years defending his legacy, writing memoirs, and participating in veterans' reunions. Despite the many challenges he faced, he remained proud of his service to the South, even as he sought to reconcile with the nation he had once fought against. James Longstreet died on January 2, 1904, at the age of 82. He was one of the last surviving Confederate generals, outliving most of his comrades and adversaries. His life and career, both during and after the Civil War, remain a complex and often misunderstood chapter in American history. Longstreet's legacy is one of loyalty, duty, and conviction, a man who fought fiercely for what he believed in, yet was unafraid to change and adapt in the face of a new reality. The years that followed brought new challenges as Longstreet tried to rebuild his life in a nation torn and ravaged by war. His legacy, like that of the South, would continue to be debated for generations. The Civil War had left the South in ruins, with devastated cities, a collapsed economy, and a divided populace. For Longstreet, the end of the war marked the beginning of a difficult new chapter. He returned to his family in Gainesville, Georgia, seeking to piece together a life shattered by the war. The conflict had taken much from him, both physically and mentally, and he still bore the wounds of battles like Wilderness while mourning the many friends and comrades he had lost. The Southern economy after the war was in disarray, and like many former Southern officers, Longstreet faced difficulties finding employment. Despite his military fame, his association with the South made it hard for him to find a stable livelihood. This uncertain period of Reconstruction left Longstreet, once a prominent figure, struggling in a rapidly changing and hostile environment. In this challenging time, he reached out to an old friend and former adversary, Ulysses S. Grant. Their relationship, forged on the battlefields of the Civil War, was now marked by mutual respect. As President of the United States, Grant offered support to Longstreet. Grant's influence helped Longstreet secure several government positions, including a role as the customs inspector in New Orleans, a position that involved him in Reconstruction politics. Longstreet's acceptance of a federal post and his willingness to work with the Republican administration made him a target of criticism in the South. Many former Confederate veterans saw him as a traitor for collaborating with the government they had once fought against. His support for Reconstruction policies, including voting rights for African Americans, further alienated him from his old comrades, turning him into a symbol of the Scalawags, Southerners who cooperated with the Northern Republicans. This decision came at great personal cost. At veterans' gatherings, where he had once been honored as a hero, Longstreet was now shunned and rejected. The bitterness of defeat and the deep divisions within Southern society left him isolated from many former friends and allies. He was accused of betraying the ideals for which many had sacrificed, making his legacy a subject of fierce debate. The political climate during Reconstruction was unstable, especially in the South. New Orleans, where Longstreet was stationed, became a hotspot for violence and unrest. In 1874, he was involved in the Battle of Liberty Place, a violent clash between a militia that included African Americans under his command and the white supremacist group known as the White League. His efforts to maintain order amid these conflicts highlighted the deep divisions in Southern society and the challenges of enforcing Reconstruction policies. Longstreet's post-war years were marked by controversy and conflict, but also by a steadfast commitment to what he believed was right. His willingness to accept the new reality of a reunited nation and his belief in reconciliation set him apart from many other Southern veterans. However, these qualities also made him a divisive figure, and his legacy in the South remained contested for decades. In the 1890s, Longstreet attempted to clarify the controversies surrounding him by publishing his memoir, From Manassas to Appomattox. In these writings, he defended his actions during the war, including his conduct at Gettysburg, and offered his perspective on the South's cause. These memoirs sparked renewed debate about his legacy. Some saw them as a vindication of his decisions, while others viewed them as an attempt to rewrite history. In his later years, Longstreet led a quiet life in Gainesville, Georgia. Although controversies continued to surround him, he remained a respected figure in the eyes of many, including his old friend Ulysses S. Grant. He outlived most of his contemporaries, witnessing the dawn of the 20th century and the transformation of the South after the Civil War. Longstreet's final years were reflective as he looked back on a life shaped by war, loyalty, and the effort to reconcile. James Longstreet passed away on January 2, 1904, at the age of 82. His death marked the passing of one of the last surviving figures of the American Civil War, a man whose life was intertwined with one of the most turbulent periods in U.S. history. As we close the chapter on James Longstreet's life, we cannot help but reflect on the profound complexities of loyalty, honor, and the cost of war. From his role as a formidable general in the Southern Army to his controversial decisions during Reconstruction, Longstreet's journey is a vivid testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of adversity. But what does it truly mean to be a hero in a world divided by conflict? As we ponder Longstreet's legacy, let's discuss: was he a traitor to his Southern roots or a forward-thinking leader seeking reconciliation in a fractured nation? How can we reconcile the choices made in the context of war with the moral dilemmas that linger long after? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Which aspects of Longstreet's story resonate with you? Let's explore how history shapes our understanding of courage and conviction. Your contributions could spark a dialogue that transcends time, illuminating lessons for future generations. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more compelling stories from history, challenging our perceptions and sparking curiosity.